Basically, Broke Reviews is not intended for children under 13 years of age. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hey everyone, how's it going? In this video, I thought it'd be a great idea to talk about collecting different lines, right? And which one might work for you as a collector. We're going to talk about value, scale, aesthetics, the whole nine yards. Basically, I'm going to be talking about collecting, of course, G1 Transformers, Generations or Chug, and there in the back, Masterpiece. I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of each and why you might want to collect them and really just how they kind of, stack up next to each other. And the first thing I'm looking at really before we go into the nitty grit on this stuff is just size scale, right? I couldn't fit three types of lines all together next to each other on the table. So I thought I would start with G1 and Generations slash Chug. I thought that would be a good kind of starting point to kind of compare and contrast the two. And of course, first we're going to be start talking off about vehicle mode scale, right? And how well I think Chug reflects the original G1 scale or whatever. And of course, we're going to be talking about Masterpiece scale as well in vehicle mode, but Transformers and scale are always a bit of a misnomer. So I'm going to go ahead and we're just going to pick the camera up and we're going to focus in on G1 first, right? And obviously, the mini bots like Bumblebee are ridiculously small compared to even the deluxe class, G1 toys. It's just, yeah. So already, as far as G1 goes, we've already got a massive fail with scale. Massive. Oh man, that was hilarious. But I do have to say, I think that the deluxe class figures scale pretty well with. I would consider these. I would consider Prime kind of the first Voyager class with a trailer, and I would consider maybe Ultra Magnus one of the first leader class Transformers we have, right? Simply because of their robot mode size. And I have to say that, the scale works pretty well. Basically, the deluxe cars are almost as long as Prime and Magnus's cab. So if we do deluxe cars nose to nose, basically it takes almost three deluxe cars, not quite, but almost three deluxe cars to equal the length of Prime in his trailer. So, this gives you just an idea of how these things scale with each other, right? They do fine. Not perfect. We'll definitely be seeing some differences when we get to robot mode, but that gives you kind of a base idea of scale for G1 such as it is, right? So now we're going to talk about Chug, right? Generations Chug, which is, we're going to start off talking about, Legends class, which I would say, more or less fit the mini bot category or the small, or who am I kidding, the small deluxe now, like Cliff Jumper. But obviously, we have Legends class Bumblebee next to Earthrise Optimus, and I think that scale largely works fine. As far as the length of the cars related to Optimus with trailer, it's now only two Autobot cars are now the same length. So it's almost, they've definitely shrunk down the trailer for scale compared to what we were. And of course, there's but Magnus is largely similar. Now, one thing that I really do like about Chug is the fact that, let's just grab Sideswipe here and G1 Jazz. And no, they don't scale perfectly, but let me go ahead and just kind of, don't roll away on me, Jazz. I know you're trying to find the music, but let's not do that right now. that kind of works. I mean, if you put these two next to each other on a shelf, that doesn't look really out of place. I mean, it looks like they could exist in the same universe. So, obviously, we have a G1 reissue and a modern day Chug, and they still fit in together pretty well. So I would say that's one thing I've always really liked about Chug is they can fit into G1 collections pretty well for the most part. Really not much trouble. And I think Chug in vehicle mode, I think the scale is pretty great for the most part. I mean, here we have Ironhide, obviously a large Autobot car, and he's basically about as long as Optimus in cab mode. Plus, he appears in vehicle mode to be bulkier than Optimus in vehicle mode, which is kind of cool, actually. But so I think the deluxe cars in the Legends class scale well. Now, this is not a Voyager, but I would call this an almost Voyager. It's a bit large. So again, the scale is not perfect. I would say Ironhide should be somewhat smaller than this in comparison to Optimus. But whatever. I think the scale largely works. Just like I think for vehicle mode with most Autobot cars, for G1, the scale mostly works. Is it perfect? No, but I think it mostly works. So I'm going to pause real quick and we'll bring Masterpiece to the forefront, and we'll talk a little bit about that scale. Okay, here we have the Masterpiece crew all together in up close and personal, and I have to say I think the scale works excellently for everyone involved. Is it better than Chug or G1? I don't know. I guess that just depends on is there any inconsistencies, right? That's the real question with the Autobot cars. We're not going to talk about Seekers and all that. We're only talking about Autobot cars. So let's see just how long Autobot cars, how many Autobot cars it takes to kind of equal Optimus Prime's trailer. There's Ironhide Sideswipe, and there is Blue Streak. So almost 3 cars, just about the same as G1. So I think we have it there. It looks like Masterpiece is a bit closer in scale to what G1 was than Chug. Chug is still pretty decent, though. I mean, it's not like the scale looks horrible with Chug. Plus, I think Chug is really good scale-wise when we're going to get down to robot mode, because that is, while yes, vehicle mode scale is important, and I think, truthfully, Masterpiece does do it best. I'm just going to throw that out there. It is the best as far as vehicle mode scale goes. I think robot mode scale is even more important. Okay, now I'm ready to talk about vehicle mode aesthetics for these different lines. And obviously what we're looking at here is a Masterpiece and 2 versions, Generations versions of Wheeljack here in vehicle mode. And it used to be that Generation / Classic Chug did not exactly go, because this is obviously the older of the 2 molds. It was more a bit of a reinterpretation, because if you compare this guy to the Masterpiece, yeah, there's some similarities, but it's obvious that this is just a a massive reinterpretation of the character versus what we're getting in Masterpiece, right? I mean, it's obviously Wheeljack, but clearly a very different type of Wheeljack, and that was the way Generations was for a long time. It seems, though, ever since with Siege onwards, because this is Earthrise Wheeljack, obviously, it seems like, yes, they obviously, have they shrunk the deluxes? Yeah, obviously they have. But Because, hell, these two really aren't that far apart from each other in vehicle mode. Now, robot mode, this is significantly bigger, but vehicle mode, there's not much difference. Whereas this is significantly smaller, but no big deal. But obviously, with Earthrise and Siege and I assume Kingdom, it feels almost like they're going for a mini Masterpiece look and feel in vehicle mode for these guys. Because are these an exact match? Of course not. But aesthetically, they're pretty damn close to each other. Very similar. Very, very similar, I would say. And I think, truthfully, before, if this was the only wheeljack I had access to, the Classics one, because I don't have a G1 wheeljack. I just don't own one. But if this was the only wheeljack I had access to, yeah, he's decent, but he's just kind of meh, right? Whereas Earthrise wheeljack is so good that if I was not able to collect Masterpiece at all, I wouldn't care. I wouldn't feel like I was really missing out on anything with the Modern Generations figures, which is really saying something. It just shows you how good of a job they are doing with Modern Generations, in my opinion, right? Is it a perfect match? Of course not. But is it pretty damn good? Absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic representation of a G1 wheeljack. So we're going to move these guys off to the side now. Next vehicle we're going to compare is, we're going to do Sideswipe. Obviously, here we have the Masterpiece version. Here we have the Siege version. And here we have Red Alert, G1. I don't own a G1 Sideswipe, but it's obviously the same mold, so there you go. And now let's pretend this guy was red, right? Now, if this guy was red instead of white, he would be a closer match for the Masterpiece in car mode than what Siege is. No doubt about it. But that doesn't really matter because, again, when we get to robot mode, well, he's much, much, much closer to, like, when we get to robot mode, the Generations one is way closer to the Masterpiece than G1. So we'll just go ahead and we'll just do a few quick comparisons. But yeah, in vehicle mode, yes, I will say that the G1 does more closely resemble the Masterpiece than the Generations because, obviously this is a reinterpretation of the Lamborghini, but I think they're really doing it in modern lines to kind of avoid some of those car licensing issues. But you can still clearly tell this is Lamborghini. It's more of a reinterpretation, I will grant you that. Vehicle mode, though, that's robot mode, whole other story. So we'll move those guys off to the side. And lastly, just for the standard cars, last one we're going to talk about is the Datsun. There is a blue streak in his Masterpiece iteration. Here is Siege blue streak. And no, I do not plan on getting the Earthrise version of this. Again, which we'll talk about when we get to robot mode. And here is G1 Prowl. Same mode as Blue Streak because I figured, hey, if I am going to have one mismatch, I might as well have two mismatches, right? For G1 and Generations. But, yeah, I mean, again, in vehicle mode, just because they were going for something more Cybertronian, yes, G1 is closer to the car than Generations is. And I've seen the renders for, and I think I've even watched a review for some of the Earthrise iterations of these guys, but even the Earthrise ones I don't feel do as good of, even they're not as close to it as the G1 is, right? And I think, again, car licensing reasons, plus, something that's real easy to do with most Modern Generations toys that you can do somewhat with Masterpiece, but it's not as easy. Of course, mounting weapons on the vehicle mode, right? Which, of course, Blue Streak is really adept at. So, but clearly, I mean, they do a pretty fine job replicating the feel of the Masterpiece car in this Deluxe. And just for fun here, we'll do G1 Prowl there. And just gives you an idea, the proportions and all that. So, yeah, that is it for the standard Autobot cars. Now, of course, we're going to talk about everyone's favorite guy, Optimus Prime. And we're going to talk about the aesthetics in truck mode. So, because Optimus is kind of the, we'll call him the standard for which we measure all other figures against, for scale and all that. They'll have to scale with good old Optimus. And obviously this is the G1, and now, is Earthrise an improvement over G1? As far as how it looks. Trailer-wise, most certainly not. Yeah, the G1 trailer is vastly superior to the Earthrise trailer. However, let's just move G1 Optimus over a bit. Move Earthrise over a bit, and then we'll roll in the big guy, MP10. Now, looking at these, which one looks more like the Masterpiece in vehicle mode? I'm going to have to be honest. It's Earthrise. This looks more like this than this does. And this is, quote, more tune accurate, I guess. So, as far as the part, yes, the trailer does matter. But as far as the part that counts the most, I have to give the cab to Generations in this one. So that's basically it for this section where I talk about the aesthetics of vehicle mode. Now, of course, I got a lot of transforming to do, and we're going to be talking about some robot mode. All right, folks, in this section, we're going to talk about scale, which, as you're well aware of, is very subjective when it comes to Transformers. Often in the animation, it's very subjective, and it's been rather subjective with toys as well over the years. So we're just going to talk about how these three lines, do and scale with each other and how much interchange there can be between them. We'll save Masterpiece for last because Masterpiece really is kind of in a class of its own, as in it's too large to scale with anything else, right? The figures are just too big to fit in with either, Generations or G1. So we're going to start with G1 because, well, it was the first toy line. And, it's just something to talk about. So only reason I included Jetfire was just to include him, right? I don't get a chance to incorporate G1 Jetfire into many videos. And I just thought I'd show him off next to Ultra Magnus. He's definitely, not much bigger than Ultra Magnus, and so clearly the scale there isn't the best. And as far as how Prime scales with Ultra Magnus, I think Prime is too small compared to Ultra Magnus for sure. Just comparatively speaking. Now, as far as the Autobot cars, how they scale with... knocked over Blue Streak there. Let's pick him back up. That is probably not the last time this is going to happen. That's going to happen. So there we go. Set him there. We're going to compare Bumblebee first, the mini-bot, with Optimus there. Because Bumblebee is friggin' tiny. So, basically, Bumblebee goes up. It looks like most of the way up Optimus's leg. So there you go. That gives you an idea of scale there. Oh, knocking him over. Here we have Blue Streak, who more or less goes up to just below Optimus's stomach. So a standard Autobot car goes up to just underneath Optimus's stomach. All right. And a large Autobot car like Hoist goes up almost to Optimus's windshield. in his robot mode. So that gives you an idea. Just if it's not whatever, a piece of hoist fell off, but that's okay. No big deal. We'll just kind of sit these guys back together. And now we're going to move on to, generations. And let's see how. Well, let's get Masterpiece Blue Streak a little bit out of the way there. Knocked over. Okay, so as far as the Autobot car goes, the larger one, Ironhide, goes up to just underneath Optimus's windshield, which is slightly larger than G1 scale, but probably just about right. Very close to being right, I would say. So let's get Ironhide kind of off to the side there. Let's see where, the scale, my stand-in for Bumblebee, because I do not yet have Earthrise Bumblebee. I don't think anybody's got him yet, except maybe some people in Asia. But anyway, he goes up most of the way Optimus's leg, so that's actually fairly close to the G1 scale. And standard Autobot car goes up more or less below lower part of Optimus's stomach, so that's not bad. Now, I do feel in oh, man. Obviously, Jetfire towers over even Ultra Magnus there. I mean, he's gigantic. I don't know if he was that much bigger in the cartoon, but I think the scale does more or less work. Of course, he is a commander class rather than a traditional leader class. But yeah, he's absolutely gigantic. But I do think Ultra Magnus he could be a bit bigger, which we'll get to, because, just for fun, we're going to go ahead and swap out Siege Ultra Magnus for a, quote, older leader class. And that, of course, is Combiner Wars Ultra Magnus. And I don't know if Ultra Magnus is too big in comparison to Prime or not. That's almost like G1 scale. Because if you look there, Prime's head kind of goes up to the bottom of Magnus's, chest piece or whatever, the connector in the middle of it. And Earthrise Prime kind of goes to kind of the middle of that connector piece. So that might be, the quote old scale for Generations might still be, slightly too large for this. So maybe the Siege is closer to what it should be. I don't know. I think I guess it probably is a little bit closer to what it, quote, should be. So also, just for fun, I don't know if this scale is more appropriate for this character or not. But of course, another, quote, old leader class. And that is leader class Jetfire. Maybe that's better for that character. I don't know. It varied so much in the cartoon, but yeah, whatever. So there you have that. So scale with Generations has definitely, as you can see, fluctuated quite a bit over the years. I feel they are in a pretty good place with it now. I think it works out fairly nicely, actually. So there's that. Now, moving on over here to Masterpiece. Okay, so obviously we're going to start off with Ratchet because, well, he's kind of in our face, a large Autobot car. And he goes up to, basically almost Prime's head. He cuts off slightly below the windshield in, for Prime's chest. So let's move Ratchet out of the way there. He's got some Autobots to fix probably. As far as Bumblebee goes, he is a little bit small, I think. I think Bumblebee should probably be about up to here or so, but still fairly close to what he should be. Blue Streak more or less goes up to right below Optimus's stomach, and Optimus goes up to more or less Ultra Magnus's windows or whatever. And some people have said, oh yeah, you can use Siege Jetfire with Masterpiece figures. That's not the case, because Siege Jetfire is barely taller than Masterpiece Ultra Magnus, and that just doesn't work for scale, I don't think. I think that's just too small. So that more or less kind of wraps it up for scale. Okay, folks, here I am to talk about a specific point with the 3 lines, and that, of course, is posability, right? And I have Masterpiece and Generations kind of in the silly superhero landing pose that we all love to see for some reason. I guess I'm just joining the trend. And we just have G1 over there really just for, completeness. Because obviously they're G1 figures. Their posability is really, 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 really limited to compared to modern figures. And they can't pull off anything remotely like this pose. So I just put them there just to put them there. So I'm gonna move the G1 figures off to the side now. I just had to have them in there for a little bit of, but I'm gonna go ahead and kind of separate these guys out a bit more just so you can see how well each figure kind of pulls this pose off, right? And I didn't want to just do the 2 Optimuses. Because if I only showed Earthrise Optimus and MP10, you'd be like, well, you're only focusing on like the main characters that they put the most engineering time into. You didn't focus on the quote lesser characters. Well, I figured I'd throw in an Autobot car with each of them. Obviously, we got Blue Streak for both, just so that little criticism would be put down. So I think, honestly, nowadays, yes, Masterpiece is still slightly ahead on posability / articulation, but not by a big factor. It's not a gigantic factor. So, of course, we're going to kind of take a look at each one of these. So, I think we'll probably actually start with the Autobot cars. So, we'll kind of move Optimus there to the background. And let's go ahead and straighten up Blue Streak here. Kind of have him in a standard standing pose. Let's get the arm down there. There we go. All right. So, come on. Oh my goodness. Come on. There we go. Oh, no. Just got to fiddle with it till it is in this very bog standard pose. Okay, there's that. Now, Masterpiece Blue Streak. Fiddle with him a bit. Okay. Turn him around. And we're going to basically see which one's more articulated, blah, blah, blah. And by how much. All right. Okay, so... Oh, did I have him straightened right for his foot? Okay. There he is. There is Blue Streak. All right, looking mighty fine. Okay, so we will start and we will count the points of articulation on, Siege Blue Streak, which will be the same for Earthrise. We will start with his foot. He's got an ankle rocker and forward and back on his foot. Yeah, he's got that piece there, but that's not particularly useful because it has to be only one certain way for him to stand. That's just more for transformation. He's got an extremely deep knee bend. He's got thigh swivel and more or less universal joint there at the hip. Of course, he's got 100% waist rotation. Let's fold his door back. His arms go all the way around, out all the way. 90-degree bend there at the elbow. Wrist rotation. And he's got some movement there at the, inward movement there at the shoulder. That is an area where, obviously, the Masterpiece will be ahead, is the inward movement there at the shoulder. And he's got, a tight ball-jointed head. It'll go all the way around and up and down some. So, as far as his overall articulation, it's pretty good. Let's look at Masterpiece Blue Streak. Well, he's got does he have more or less foot articulation than it's probably slightly more than Siege Blue Streak. I have a mistrans. No, I didn't have his foot mistrans. So yeah, sorry, I thought I might have had a mistransform, but I didn't. Apologize. Anyway, yeah, his foot articulation, it's about the same. You know, his knee articulation, yes, that does that, but that's for transformation. I don't really consider that an articulation point. His knee bend is actually, it's about the same as Siege. He's got thigh swivel. He doesn't actually go out as far, but you know, he's got all the useful articulation you need in the hips there. He of course has waist rotation. His shoulders, yeah, they are more, because of the way he transforms, they're on more of a hinge there, so they do have more of a range of motion. He does have a double jointed elbow, so he's able to, you know, go all the way out. And he's got the articulated fingers there. And of course his head, focus camera, is more or less on a ball joint, so there you go. So he has slightly, I would say the Masterpiece is slightly more articulated than the the Siege, right? But I don't think it's a gigantic difference. It's minor at best, and you can more or less get these guys into basically the same poses, right? It's not going to really be all that difficult. So there you go. We compared the Autobot car. Now, of course, Matt, we got to compare Optimi, right? So I guess we will start with, Earthrise Prime. So let's straighten him up. To a very standard position. So, foot articulation. Obviously, we got an ankle rocker there. Not much forward and back, but we have like toe and heels that fold in due to transformation. Not particularly useful. Real deep bend there at the knee, much more than 90 degrees. He's got thigh rotation, obviously. Goes out all the way. Forward all the way. Back that much. Now, he does have waist rotation, not 100% due to this piece blocking it because of transformation. Now, you can take this piece off and have him rotate 100%, but I consider that cheating, so I'm not going to do it. He's got a, ball jointed head, more or less, so, all the normal head stuff there. Shoulder goes out that much. 90-degree bend there. Of course, all the way around. And that is more or less it for his articulation. So he's very decently articulated. All right, so MP10. Straighten him out. Okay. We'll have to get the camera up just a little bit more for MP10, I think. All right, just because he's so much taller. All right, that's good. All right, so. Okay. So, ankle rocker, obviously. Does go forward a little bit, the foot. Obviously, we got toe and heel curl. Does have rotation there. The bottom of the knee. 90-degree bend at the knee there. Leg goes forward that much. Back that much. All the way out. Full waist rotation. Obviously, we go all the way around there at the shoulder. Goes all the way out. 90-degree bend there at the elbow. Of course, we got the finger thing going on with MP10. And lastly, a greater range of movement in the head. So, as far as which of these guys is more posable, I'd say MP10 is slightly more posable. But again, it's not by a very big margin. It's a bit more posable, right? He's just like slightly more. Like, do I even have? Ooh, I don't. Let's. Jeez. At least have I'm pointing in a little bit there. Whatever. I just gotta match them up to the same pose. Yeah, I mean, it's very similar levels of articulation. And as far as like which one you prefer, obviously that's going to be down to kind of personal preference. So that's it for articulation. On to the next part. Okay, so here we are finally to talk about aesthetics and value when it comes to these three lines. And we're going to start with G1. And finally, the Decepticons are getting some love. I know you probably thought it would never happen, but I thought, hey, why not throw the cons a bone here? And basically, what I want to say about G1 is the aesthetic is unique, right? As far as cartoon accuracy, it's just not, for the most part, right? You can tell who the characters are supposed to be, obviously, but they don't really look very much like their animated incarnations in general. Some characters are obviously better than others, but most of them definitely leave a bit to be desired. That being said, I do enjoy the G1 aesthetic, but to be completely transparent, a lot of it is simply nostalgia because I was a kid when G1 debuted and was, a thing. I was 6 years old, right? So I was the perfect target audience for G1 Transformers when they were an actual thing, right? So, yeah. So aesthetic, I find it charming and unique, but not all collectors might. They might look at these and think, oh my god, these are objectively, because terrible toys. Because if you compare these to, say, any modern Transformer, they are kind of inferior, more or less in every way. And by that I mean, they don't look as good. The articulation on G1 figures is a joke compared to more modern Transformers. And, yeah, I mean, they're just nowhere near as good as any modern Transformer, period. Now, as far as value goes, or how much you pay for these things, that's all over the map. I don't think they're the best in value, but I don't think they're the worst either. I'll show you an example of a few recent acquisitions that I have. I got this at a flea market just a few weeks ago, actually, for $10. And it's a pretty good condition, G1 Sea Spray, but it was $10. Now, is this more value than basically what you get nowadays, a 2-pack of Micromasters? That's for you to decide, right? Would you rather have G1 Sea Spray or 2 Micromasters? Up to you, right? But I could tell you things that I didn't feel were a particularly great value, right? The rest of the figures you're seeing are G1 reissues, right? So Blue Streak, I paid back in like 01 or 02. He was a Toys R Us reissue. I paid $30 or $35 for him, right? And that's in 2001 or 2002 money. So essentially that would have been like, I don't know, $50, right? Maybe now. I don't know. I don't have an inflation calculator in front of me, but so quote, the value wasn't that great. A more recent acquisition, Astro Train from Walmart. I think I paid like $40 for this, which is only $10 less than the Siege one, and I have the Siege one as well. Is this better than the Siege or nearly as good as the Siege? Oh God, no. Not even close. It's objectively worse than the Siege in pretty much every measure as far as toy goes, right? So the value isn't that high. Now, And I paid like $70 or $80 for that Devastator reissue back there. $70 or $80 will get you freaking Siege, Jetfire, or Skylynx. A million times better figure than G1 Devastator. But now I'm going to talk about value that I thought was fairly good. I paid either $40 or $50 for the reissue there of Prime and Magnus. And now keep in mind, that was with Prime's full trailer. I thought that was worth the price. Whereas now, there was a recent G1 reissue of Prime again for like $40 or $50 without the trailer, which is absolutely ridiculous. It sat in Walmart. Gee, I can't imagine why. I think they finally clearanced it out for like $20 or $30. But regardless, that was a ridiculous cost for Prime without a trailer. So, I don't know. As far as value goes for G1, it's all over the place. In some places, it's pretty good. Other places, it's piss poor. But I don't know. As far as the aesthetic goes and the characters, I like it. You know, I really like it. I find it charming. Hence, that's why I have a decent amount of G1 figures. Although it's definitely not the focus of my collection, I do appreciate them and all that. So that's it for G1. We're now going to talk about the next series. Okay, so here we are to talk about aesthetics and / value of Generations and Masterpiece, right? So let's have the value conversation first, right? And that is, of course, cost relative to what you get. I have to say, I think overall, Generations is a far better value. That's because, well, the figures are much more affordable. Standard Autobot cars are $20. They were $15 for a long time, but let's not talk about the price increase, right? Whereas Autobot cars in Masterpiece are anywhere from like 80 up to 100 and something, right? And are they 4 to 5 times better than, the G1, or I'm sorry, the Generations figures? Definitely not. No. And of course, one of the most glaring things, yes, that's MP10, but he's not the modern, current Masterpiece Prime. MP44 costs $450. Whereas, Earthrise Optimus is $50. Yeah, that's laughable. So, as far as value goes, obviously, Chug has it all over Masterpiece. Now, let's just talk about aesthetics, because that's more subjective, right? Which group do you think looks better? I don't know. I think they both look awesome. They're both extremely cartoon accurate. Obviously, more so with Masterpiece. But Generations nowadays is darn close. It used to be a real mixed bag. Sometimes in Generations, they'd absolutely nail it. Other times, not so much. But now, from Siege onwards, they're doing a great job making them, accurate, right? And in fact, I would say the aesthetics now in Siege and onward kind of are mini Masterpiece. And let's go ahead and explore that just a little bit, right? So I'll move the camera in, and we'll do some kind of apples-to-apples comparisons of the same characters, right? So, let's move this. We'll start with Ultra Magnus, because he's so humongous, right? So, let's grab Leader Magnus there. And if you look at those two figures, right? As far as aesthetics go, overall feel, are they different? Of course. They're not the same. But are they similar? Yeah. I say they're real similar. And as far as articulation goes, I actually think the Siege is better than the Masterpiece. In some ways, I definitely prefer the Siege to the Masterpiece. But the Masterpiece looks incredibly great. I mean, he's just a great-looking Ultra Magnus. But then again, so is Siege. They're both great figures for different reasons. But I have to say, as far as aesthetically goes, I think very similar. And I like them both a lot for different reasons. Okay, next up, I think we're gonna take a look at Wheeljack. Right? We're gonna take a look at Masterpiece and Earthrise. And aesthetically, man, these guys again close to each other. Are they identical? Of course not. And I think obviously the Masterpiece does look somewhat better than the Earthrise one. And to be fair, I do have some extra accessories with the Earthrise that don't come with them. So let me take off the pieces that he doesn't come with out of the box. He comes rather, unarmed out of the box. So that leads me to my next point. Obviously, on the quote whole accessories thing, Masterpiece has every other line beat because they come with accessories. For basically they'll come with things that you only ever saw like in one episode. Like Wheeljack here comes with a few inventions and a few other things. Whereas all Earthrise comes with is the single shoulder mounted weapon. And of course you can use it as a handheld weapon too if you want. But it's kind of very poor as far as accessories go. And that is one of the negatives with the new line is that they come with far fewer accessories than they should. And I don't know why that is because they're so on point with everything else with these toys. It really is a shame. But if you're a long-time collector, you can easily supplement your figures with accessories. These two are from a different Wheeljack, from Universe Classics Wheeljack. Give him his gun and a wrench, and well, now you have a pretty complete-looking Wheeljack. So I don't know. It's annoying, but yeah, I think that's probably the biggest advantage with the Masterpiece over Earthrise is because of the fact that he has all the accessories he needs. He doesn't. But it's not like you can't get accessories or upgrade kits. Upgrade kits are a great way to, get your guys where they need to be with accessories. Now, that does hurt the value proposition just a little bit with Generations as compared to Masterpiece, but not significantly. I mean, you can get an Earthrise Wheeljack kit for like, what, $10, $15, so that ups him to maybe $30, $35. As opposed to I don't know what this guy cost originally, like $80 or whatever. So I mean, it's still kind of a, no brainer. Plus, if you just have accessories from older figures anyway, it's there. So I don't know, but yeah, I mean, I really just think overall, Wheeljack is just one of the figures here that epitomizes the whole mini Masterpiece thing. That absolutely does apply, I think, in this case. So, there's that. And there's that. Okay, our next comparison, we'll just do Sideswipe. And, again, the mini Masterpiece thing, I think, definitely applies to this figure. To Siege Sideswipe. And of course, we do have the same problem with accessories, right? But because that's all he comes with out of the box. But, this came with one of the weaponizers. I believe this was one of Cog's guns. You just give him that, and there he is, armed up fully and looking awesome. Which one of these is better? That's going to be down to personal taste. I can say that the transformation is a bit more fiddly on the Masterpiece than on the Generations version. And that's one way I think Generations is actually vastly superior to Masterpiece, and that is the transformations. The transformations, obviously, with the Generations toys are much simpler than Masterpiece, right? But they're still satisfying, and you still get absolutely excellent robot and vehicle modes. Whereas with the Masterpiece, you got all these panels. They're very fiddly, a bit fragile, as I'm going to talk about with the next comparison. they're just much more. They're more complicated than I really think they have to be. Yes, you do get a more tune accurate, but is it worth the cost of the more complex transformation? Because it makes, truthfully, them, quote, less fun to manipulate overall than Generations/Chug. Yeah, so that to me is kind of a detriment. So, but anyway, there you go. There's those two. And finally, we're going to be talking. We're not done. I guess next up, we're going to talk about the mini bots. I don't yet have Earthrise Bumblebee, but I will soon. And yeah, both of these guys look great. But talk about a fiddly transformation. Yeah, Bumblebee has one. Masterpiece Bumblebee. And I actually broke this guy while transforming him back to robot mode. So yes, for your guys' entertainment, I broke the rear section of this off. Now, I did manage to basically secure it on there, so it'll stay in robot mode, but I'm literally never going to transform this figure again. He's just basically an action master now. I mean, he's a good-looking action master, but that's all he is. Which is kind of disappointing, but such is life, right? And this is not the first Masterpiece toy I've broken just transforming it. I've broken a couple transforming them. But as far as Generations toys go, I never break them when I'm transforming them. I've yet to ever break a Chug. I've been collecting for 20 years. And while transforming the figures, I've never really... Well, there is one exception, Energon Scorponok. But aside from that, I have never ever broken a Chug transformer while I've been transforming it. Ever. Ever. Whereas I've broken, I don't know, 3 or 4 Masterpieces. So... they're much more fragility. They're much more fragility. Much more fragile. Much more fragility, yeah. So, yeah, I think that's another major point in Generations/Chug's favor. And, I don't know, the aesthetic? Which one of these is better? Again, subjective choice, right? So, there you go. And before we get down to kind of the final two, let's talk a little bit more about aesthetic. And yeah, I want to give the cons a little bit of love. And the reason I'm showing these guys off in particular, it's the Target 2-pack of Thundercracker and Skywarp. Or Skywarp and Thundercracker, whatever. Since I put Skywarp up first. These guys, I mean, look at these. These are incredibly awesome looking Seeker molds, right? The reason I'm bringing them up is they just announced, yet again, another Seeker mold is next for Masterpiece. That's another thing I don't really like about Masterpiece. They do the same characters over and over and over and over and over and over again. We've yet to get a Galvatron, for example, or a Cyclonus in Masterpiece. Yeah, there are third-party options, but that's a whole other discussion. I'm talking about from Takara/Hasbro. They just keep retreading the same characters over and over and over again. And are you really going to tell me, because I know that those Seekers are going to cost over $200 a pop from Takara, right? Whereas these guys were $30 for two. Oh, not 30, sorry, $60 for two. $30 each, right? Are you going to tell me that those, hell, maybe they'll cost $300, who knows? Are they really going to be 10 times better than these? I don't think so. I mean, because if you just look at this guy, I mean, that is an absolutely incredible looking, kind of F-15. Yeah, the underside's not great, but that's every jet transformer ever. But if you look at the upper side, my God, that is incredible. And Skywarp. I mean, yeah, I could do without the screaming face, but I mean, just looking at this guy, he looks amazing. I really think that Chug has gotten so good in a lot of ways, it's kind of negated the need for Masterpiece. I know. Now, we're just going to talk about a couple more figures, and I am going to talk about these two. We're going to talk about Ironhide and Ratchet first. So, obviously, this is Siege Ironhide, and we know Earthrise Ironhide is on his way, but And Earthrise Ironhide obviously looks more Earth-based than Siege does. But truthfully, of course, I've watched some of the early video reviews of Earthrise Ironhide. And you know what? I'm happy with Siege Ironhide, truthfully. I don't need Earthrise Ironhide. And that could be because I do have the Masterpiece Ironhide. Yeah, not pictured, but I do have him. I think you might have even seen him earlier in this video, in vehicle mode. But this is so good that this is a very G1 accurate Ironhide. I mean, look at that head sculpt. Look at the chest. I mean, that is Ironhide, no doubt about it. Yes, is Masterpiece Ratchet more cartoon accurate? Sure. And he, of course, is way ahead on accessories. No doubt about that. But, I don't know. Is it that much better? I don't know. Up for you to decide. Now, of course, we're going to talk about Prime, which is the standard all other measures seem to be measured against for whatever reason. So, let's talk about probably the biggest flaw with Earthrise Optimus. And that is, for some bizarre reason, the paint job on the head. There is no silver there above his mouth plate. Makes no sense at all because it makes his eyes extremely hard to see. Very frustrating. I don't get it because otherwise the figure is amazing. Whereas, of course, with MP10, I mean, that's more or less a perfect cartoon head sculpt. You know. Now, there are some issues with MP10. Like, the proportions aren't the greatest because if you fully extend his arms. Because, yes, I did cheat to get them. You know, his proportions aren't the best. But as far as aesthetics go, I think MP10 is still looks really good even now. I think he holds up incredibly well. And is an awesome toy. Now, would I pay $450 for this type of an Optimus Prime, which is what MP44 costs? Absolutely not. You know? Absolutely not. And as far as which one of these guys you like better, of course, that's going to be your personal choice. I like them both for different reasons, but I will give the nod to MP10 in this case. I do think he's a somewhat better looking figure. So, anyway, that's it for this part. On to the next part. So which of these lines should you collect? Well, that's going to obviously be a very individualized choice, right? It's going to come down to your personal sense of aesthetics, value, how much space you have in your collection, all that stuff, right? But I will give some generalized opinions that I have, and you can either agree or disagree with me in the comments, hopefully. We're going to start off by talking about G1. I would say to anyone but, how can I put this, hardcore collectors, I would think G1 would be pretty limited appeal, right? The cost is high relative for what you get. The aesthetics, just face it, are very poor compared to the other two lines. And the toys are pretty much objectively worse than the other two lines. You know, but if you grew up with G1, you're going to love it. I don't know if there's really going to be that many kids who would be interested in G1. I can't imagine there would be. But I would assume, you know, the G1 collectors are probably all old guys like me at this point. You know, I could be wrong, but that's going to be my assumption. Kind of the same thing for Masterpiece, but for an entirely different reason. I think Masterpiece is a great looking line, obviously, but it's also extremely expensive compared to the other two, well, at least compared to mainline Chug. G1 can get insanely expensive if you are like a mint and box collector or looking for vintage stuff that's in really good condition. It can easily surpass Masterpiece. But, Masterpiece is I like it, but it's definitely got some flaws. To me, the biggest flaw is the fragility and the wonkiness of some of the transformations, which can result in some breakage, which I haven't had trouble with other lines. So, yeah, it's an issue, especially for the cost of these damn things, right? It should be you should be able to play with them more or less carefree, but you just can't. You just can't with Masterpiece. That's just reality. So of course that's going to leave us with Chug, right? What do you get with Chug? Well, you get stuff that's easily found in stores for one, right? You're not going to walk into Walmart or Target or whatever and see either G1 or well, I was going to say G1 or Masterpiece. That's not entirely true because you do see G1 reissues pop up at Walmart, and that's where I've gotten a number of mine. But typically, you're not going to find either Masterpiece or G1 on store shelves. So accessibility, obviously, Chug has it all over. As far as value goes, I think Chug's the winner there too, right? It's going to be the least expensive thing to collect, and and as far as the durability of the toys, how good the toys are, the toys look awesome, and I don't break them, when I transform them. And obviously I'm an adult collector, so I'm very gentle with my toys. I'm not like, like that. But the strange thing about Generations is I almost feel like it's just geared towards adult collectors, even though you could potentially give them to a younger audience. How many 6-year-old kids are clamoring for Siege Sideswipe, right? I can't imagine it's a lot. I'd be, I don't know. I think it's odd, but whatever. I'm just happy that as a Transformers fan, we're getting these great lines, and we have an abundance of choices. So that's pretty much it. That kind of wraps up what I think of each one of these lines. Please let me know in the comments below what you think of all this. That's basically it. I hope you guys enjoyed this or learned something or whatever. So, thank you so much for watching. Live long and prosper, and see you guys next time.